a friend of the show and a friend of mine. It's Tara from Up Games. How are you doing, Tara?
Hello, I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Yeah, good to have you with us.
Good to be here.
I
It's
would ask
almost
what
the weekend. You've
I,
almost made it.
I know, I would ask what the weather was like I've been doing with everyone, but I imagine it's much the same as it is with me, which is starting to pick up, actually.
Fingers crossed. Fingers
Yes,
crossed. I had the barbecue ready for the moment
yes,
the sun peeks out.
yeah.
I'm ready to. Yeah.
Yeah, we had one of the, I would say, coldest barbecues ever last week with me and my brother. So we'll hope the weather picks up better.
I know. I invited somebody around for a socially distanced garden barbecue last weekend, and it was just the worst.
Yeah, I know it was. It was last weekend, the same.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, hopes and
Well,
dreams.
in the interest of time, I'm going to let you get on with your talk, which is all about designing with constraints. And I know you've got some interactive parts and everything else like that.
Oh, you've been warned, hey?
So everyone, look forward to a really exciting talk. And yeah, if you've got any questions, throw them into the Q&A, and I'll be back to chat more with you later.
Great. All right. Sounds
There's
good.
the talk, and yeah, I'll be here if you need me in the background.
Thanks, Sophia. All right, everybody. So let's hope this goes well, hey? Because I don't know what's going on anymore. It's Friday. Kidding. Game design, designing within constraints. So that was my most professor-like introduction into this. And basically, I am going to be asking for your participation. So you are all going to be my test subjects in this wonderful little experiment. So please be prepared to participate. As you all are familiar with the Q&A button, I'd also like you to get familiar with the chat button, which I'm going to try and do right now. So can you all see that? Actually, how do I should have checked this with Pocket Gamer people, but you're going to have to back me up on this. Okay, so I would like everybody to go ahead and say hello in chat. And while you guys get familiar with that, and while I get familiar with that, I would like to introduce myself. So, oh, look at that flashing button. Hello, everyone. I'm the CEO and founder of Code Coven, which is the very first remote bootcamp video game school focusing on marginalized developers. We've got some exciting programs going on at the moment where we've recently opened up game scholarships for our Intro to Game Making course, as well as an incubator for developers, early stage developers who are affected by COVID, and also an incubator in August with Wings Fund to be able to help those who are affected by the cancellation of events like this. I'm also the Chief Design Officer and co-founder of Up Games, where we are a mobile free-to-play studio founded by women of color and working on HBO's title Insecure, which is in its 4th season right now. I'm on the board of multiple game studio initiatives, and I speak a lot on design, remote work, and diversity and inclusion. And I've been in this industry for a very long time. So shipped over 10 titles in 15 years with the likes of EA, Microsoft, and Backbone Entertainment, as well as smaller indie studios such as Deep Fried Entertainment and Playable. And I have also not shipped about 7 titles, but who's counting? No, I'm kidding. Those 7 titles are just as important as the 10 titles, because as you all probably know, you learn a lot more from failing in some ways than you do from success. So on that note, let's see, all of you wonderful people in chat, thank you for saying hello. Hello to all of you. I would like to say that the 5th person who said hello wins a prize. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Charlie, you are a winner. Congratulations. Design within constraints. So this is part of a bigger masterclass that I like to teach. So I'm going to try and jam in as much as I can in this short space of time. And to follow on with our audience participation, I would love for you to be able to just jump in there and tell me what your discipline is. When we think about design and the sort of masterclasses I offer, I'm not just doing this for designers. I think it's really important to figure out, when you're coming from different disciplines, what designers are looking for and how to effectively communicate and expressing sort of the angles that you're coming from. You know, as somebody who's worn the designer hat and the production hat, I've often been at odds with that person in that role in particularly. I know that in working with engineers, the caveat is, oh, did it done exactly what was designed? And you're sitting there as a designer going, well, what about all of this other stuff that was obviously in my head and it's just logical? Artists getting fed up with designers constantly changing the design. You know, from the BIs, especially in the mobile free-to-play space, you're, you know, reeling off your LTV, ARPDAO, ARPUPU, and all the other different combinations of the alphabet that you can imagine. Localization, of course, you're always worried about your loc strings tables and being able to translate that on a cultural level, but also a linguistic level. And that's a very expensive endeavor and something for designers to consider. One thing that we joke about when we first heard localization pricing, for example, in some of the studios I worked with, is we can't even afford the E in eFigs. So that's something to consider. For QA, it's understanding that when designers tend to say as designed, it might be a catch-all for I just really don't want to deal with this right now. And for audio, well, everybody leaves audio till last. So, you know, why break with tradition? No, I'm kidding. We'll talk about audio. So yeah, I want to get a sense from the audience what your disciplines are, and my headset is now losing battery. So as you can understand, it's probably been a busy day for all of you as well as me. The second person who answered that question wins an achievement, unlocked an achievement. Patty, you are an achievement unlocker. Congratulations. In continuing with our participation, what do you think that designers want or need to thrive? I'll give you all a second. Thank you, Charlie. I'm just writing this down, you see. Okay, so yeah, when I usually ask this question, a lot of the feedback that I get, especially from people, of course, not in the industry, they just say, well, you get to make games and have fun all day. And, you know, that isn't the case. You know, we hear a lot about wanting freedom, and yes, creative liberty is a great way to start that, and having unlimited, sort of not having any boundaries, being able to explore all the different avenues and sort of refine vision off of that. But what I've actually found is we thrive really well when we have boundaries in place. And what I'd like to draw attention to is, and I don't know if you all have been seeing sort of some really popular series right now, Last Dance on Netflix, about Michael Jordan, the Bulls, and the Chicago Bulls basketball team, and Phil Jackson, who was the coach of the Chicago Bulls as well as the LA Lakers, and he took both teams to a lot of great success. And one of the things that he is known for is his amazing management structure and getting the most out of each person on his team. And one of the things that he was talking about in his book, 11 Rings, which I highly recommend, is a system that he designed called the triangle system, or he encouraged, where he said it empowers the players, offering each on a vital role to play, as well as a high level of creativity within a clear, well-defined structure. The system that he was talking about was setting these parameters for the players within this triangle to understand what their roles are and how they can immediately respond to the action that's happening on the court, to be able to respond quickly and have that creative freedom, because they would know clearly what they were there to do. And so in thinking of that, you know, what do you think that designers want or need to be successful? And I think a couple of people have touched on it in chat already. So we've got a clear view of the game. We've got, I think Bav said, a well-communicated vision, having some of those persistence, exactly, but it's having some of those structures in place. What I'd like to talk about is sort of like the walls. And I don't know if you've all had a chance, but there's a really excellent book. I've got it right beside me. I will refer to it, called Blood, Sweat, and Pixels. And in it, one moment they talk about, for one of the stories, Stardew Valley. And that's an interesting sort of paradigm that I want to pick up on, because I don't know if any of you are familiar with the story of Stardew Valley. But Eric Barone basically started it after he came out of university and had trouble finding jobs, and he had a vision that he wanted to express. Now, he was sort of in this idealistic situation, or quote unquote ideal situation, where he didn't have sort of these constraints that we're talking about that we often find in when we're working for other studios. But what he did do initially was talk about what he wanted to create. And as you can see in this quote, he says, when you're playing it, I want every moment to be full of joy and wonder, and to bring back the kind of magic that you may have felt when you first played video games. So this harkens sort of to that idea of your X statement. Now with Stardew Valley, it was to create a new type of farming simulator that was built off of sort of the ideas of Harvest Moon and Rune Factory. But he wanted to encapsulate this feeling of joy and wonder and magic. And when the follow-up to that is him saying, what makes me feel good and makes me feel like my life has been totally worthwhile is the fact that Stardew Valley has brought so much joy and happiness to people. And has done, has brought a lot of positive to the world. It feels really good. So he was able, as a solo developer, which he, spent 4 years developing the project, established an X, established the core genre of the game that he wanted to make, and stuck to that in order to come to complete his vision. And this is exactly why one of the things as parameters is really good to have at the outset, and to keep on coming back to throughout your development cycle. And one of those things that I want to talk about is back to my point earlier about not all designers are the same, is the inherent understanding that you have different designers. You have UX designers, UI designers, weapons designers, systems, economy, currency, I'm sure you can, name off a couple. But you also have to understand what kind of designer you're working with in terms of phases. When I first started at Microsoft, one of the questions that they asked me in my interview was, what is your favorite phase of design or phase of production? And at first, you could be pre-production, could be that conceptualized phase, could be in production, or finaling, your alpha and your beta phase. And for me personally, finaling is my favorite. I thrive off of deadlines. And for me, that's when a game really comes together, because you've got the goalposts set. You know that every variable you're tuning, every platform you're moving, if you're making a platform game, for example, is in pursuit of that end goal of creating the most fun and brilliant experience that adheres to the X statement, and that those goalposts are in sight. For me, pre-production, absolute hell. Like, the hills are not alive with the sound of music. I absolutely hate having that much freedom. I need those constraints. But a lot of designers will find that that's the place that they excel. So when you're working in a team with designers, I think take into consideration what kind of designers you're working with. And for those, just this little tip, for those who do have a designer like me, in pre-production, one of the most valuable things that I can do to be able to get the most out of this phase is to be able to set like 2-week deadlines, 2-week sprints, and say, I have got this much time to prototype something, whether it's gray boxed, whether it's a paper prototype, to validate this idea and then take it on to the next level. So I still have to provide myself with some sort of constraint or structure in order to get the most out of it. And thank you for the additional happy and hippie Fridays. Yeah, let's constrain away. So in terms of our game, so this is me being meta with my experiment of game design here and trying to fit as much into this as possible. We've been playing a game this entire time, right? So I asked the 5th person, Charlie, who won a prize, to say hi on that first slide. I asked for a sense of disciplines in the audience, and Patty won that. Charlie, again, was the first person to say Happy Friday. And I didn't tell you all, but there was also an achievement for total participation, which I think Charlie probably won as well. Quick off the mark, indeed. So that probably was kind of a shitty game, to be absolutely honest. And that's because I never told any of you what the parameters were off the mark. you know. You didn't know you were participating. You didn't know that there would be a prize for total achievement, and that is unfair. So this is one of those examples of sort of getting to test early and getting to test rapidly because you get feedback really quickly. So if we were to go through this whole process again, we'd start with like the first constraint, which would be either your X statement, or if you're particularly business focused, who your target audience are. And I'd really recommend doing at least 4 or 5 personas to identify who your target market is. And I don't know if you can you see my screen if I, again, audience participation, drag over my Miro board here. So Miro is a great tool. I am not sponsored by them, but they have really great templates that you can use to sort of build out your games, and it's great visibility, and it's a really great collaborative tool. So when you're thinking of your personas of your target market, I think this is a really great board to start with, and it's very sort of not games driven, but you know, you can imagine if you were, let's take our audience for example. It's Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon, and we're an audience of probably B2B execs and indie game developers who are really tired and probably have sore throats and want to sit back and kick back with a beer and do something fun. So knowing that, the reasons to use this game that we've developed now is that we probably want to keep high engagement for the people who are just tired, tired from a really busy but great conference. And the reason to get involved is because we get social validation, we get the competitive streak, and if we want to talk about sort of like I think it's Bartle's MMO criteria, he said there's like 4 different aspects to how people play games, and that's you've got your socializers, you've got your achievers, and you've got your explorers, and you've got your killers, and they're the ones who like PvP and things like that. So we've managed to hit a couple of those targets in this. We've created something that's social, we've created something with a sense of achievement, Patty, our achievement unlocker there. We've managed to get some competition in first person to say happy Friday, and we've gotten people to participate in the social level. So we've ticked all of those boxes. You know, we get the what are our personalities, and I think we can see them coming through in chat over there, and our interests lie with our different disciplines that we've established, and skills predominantly in the games industry, and then you kind of get your idea of tech savviness, which can apply to different aspects in game development. Like, are you you know, trying to appeal to people who are not necessarily tech savvy and want a one-to-one experience of Scrabble on their phone? You know, I know there's been some controversy, for example, around Scopely, of how they took EA's version of Scrabble and translated that into mobile. And theoretically, you know, some of the controversy that's made sort of local papers is that didn't translate well for that audience. It changed how they perceived it and how they were able to enjoy it. So from that, I would say the next step into designing with constraints is your flow chart, right? So from our experience in our game, we know from the user standpoint, there was a problem in that probably 60% of you didn't understand we were participating in a game, or let's say 100%, because I didn't explain those rules at the beginning. So if, you know, if this is like your first time user experience, if the player understands that they've done this before, then they can go skip straight to the head to the game. If not, then I should have said something up front, which explained the whole process. And then I want you to take this and apply it to also your team, your business. So as a designer, have I expressed what the design documents are, for example, to a programmer? Has the programmer expressed what our constraints are in terms of the device, in terms of how big this game has to be? Has our production or project management team expressed what the deadline is? Who our audience are? Have we got that information? And you know, the list goes on. Art, do we have enough capacity to create lots of assets? How overburdened is our art team? Yeah, even localization, you know, have we provided localization team with our strings? How much text are we using? How much of it is embedded into our graphics? You know, like I once worked on a project where everything was hard coded, or, you know, into the baked into the art. So changing a string was a really horrible experience. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is take these flows and apply them to the decision-making process of your team to understand where these blocks are going to come up. And you do that fundamentally by establishing what your constraints are off of the bat. So first things first is probably taking into consideration your X. In the case of Stardew Valley, you know, I want to make a farming game that is joyful and magical and harkens back to sort of old school games, and is improvement on Harvest Moon and Moon Factory. I want to understand your audience. Who are your personas? Who are you trying to target? And provide those frameworks for your team to understand, for your design to come through, and figure out if it's measuring against those benchmarks. Are your team positioned in a way to so that you can get the most out of them, so that they can thrive? Have you provided your team, your designers, your engineers, everybody actually, with the parameters that they need to be able to maximize the work that they need to achieve? You know, in the case of our game, for example, yeah, I tested you guys early. I've tested this framework for masterclasses. I've gotten a lot of feedback just from this experience in and of itself. And you know, have we communicated? One of the great things about working remotely, and I've worked remotely for over 2.5 years now, is using Slack, using things like Miro to expose, to be transparent, and not to be too prideful of, you know, or precious about your designs. The earlier you get them out there, you can see where things are going wrong. You can get that validation back. And you can see if you are actually thriving within those constraints. So I try to make sure that we are on time and jam through that as effectively as possible. But I hope from a high level it was informative and enables you guys to be able to see where to put in basic constraints, and why it's also a great idea to, you know, sort of like test early and test often. And really appreciate you all jumping in there and participating. So yeah, that's me. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm back again, and yeah, thank you. That was great. Some bit of interaction, get everyone going, get everyone's creativity flowing in a sense. Yeah, get everyone thinking and moving, because we can be a bit static at the moment, can't we?
Well, I was surprised. Yeah, so thank you.
No, not at all. We've got a couple of minutes, as I am finding, at least with everyone I seem to be doing, the questions seem to come after rather than during. So in the meantime, I will do what I often do and ask one of my own questions, which I think might be relevant to some of the people in the audience, which is, obviously we say, you know, test a lot and test early and test often. But I suppose a little bit of that is like, how early? So I get a lot of indies asking, like, how early should they test, or how early should they pitch for feedback? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
If you're wondering if it's too early, you're probably too late.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's really hard, because I always know that I want something to be perfect or polished. And, you know, I always hate it when I put something out there personally and somebody's like, oh, well, this is wrong and this looks horrible and this looks that. And I'm like, I know, we haven't done that yet because this is just a prototype. And I know. But you know, the truth is that you're always going to get some gems out there, and yeah, it's okay, you know. And just to that point as well, when you are putting things out there, if it is a prototype, lean into making it ugly. Make it as ugly as you possibly can. You know, sure, go the gray box route, but sometimes I have to make things so ugly so everybody knows this is absolutely not a finished product.
Yeah.
But just be really clear on also what you're trying to validate. Make those little, like, sort of just like little breadcrumbs of what you're trying to test and validate. And there's even great ways to I think it's called UI. Oh God, I can't, something like Tester or something, and you get 5 minutes of somebody's time on an iOS device to validate something, and you can't guide them at all. But it's really great to be able to see just that little slice of, is this working how I want it to? But yeah, the earlier the better.
Well, and that's fantastic. And as I thought, here come the questions. So we'll start with Goran's question, who came in first. I wish I had a prize to give you, Goran. But Goran has said, you mentioned a person, but what about super fans?
What does that mean?
I mean, I'm obviously speaking for Goran here, but I suppose if we think about testing an audience, not audience, but yeah, the audience of your game and the interaction, you know, I suppose there's one thing to test it on maybe people who are sort of, let's say, gamers or maybe non-gamers, but with a super fan, it might be someone who, like, let's say it's a hyper casual game, someone who exclusively, you know, is involved in hyper casual, or say you're adding something to your game, it might be one of your sort of longest term players. Do you think it's better or worse, I suppose, to test on someone who's like has an understanding of what you're doing in terms of the genre or the makeup of the game or anything like that? Or do you think that there's value in testing it on someone who maybe is a bit more broad in their experiences?
Okay, now I definitely see what you're saying, and I think that's an interesting point of view, because I think when we identified the personas first, I think it's really good to have a wide range. So for example, with you know, at Glow Up with the Insecure title, I know that the show on average gets about 4 million viewers per episode, and they have a really dedicated fan base. So I know that's a persona of people that we want to test the game early against to make sure that we're hitting the right tonal marks. Because the game is sort of like has RPG elements with rapping, I also know that to validate that those mechanics are working, I want somebody who has a persona of somebody who enjoys RPGs and is a big fan like that. But then I also want a persona of somebody who maybe isn't of either of those levels, you know, to see where their engagement is. And I think a great way to engage also, if you do have a super fan base, is because they know your IP or they know your mechanics so well, they're probably able to give you the most sort of core feedback of whether you're hitting those marks in line with your targets, and kind of validate all of those findings. But also it's a great way to also keep them engaged as a community, and keep them involved, which, you know, super fans / whales are kind of in that sort of same little bubble there, you know, so you do want to bring them in.
Yeah, definitely. And it would be remiss of me not to say to the audience that if you want to learn more about what you're doing at Glow Up and the development of the game, then there's a talk from Pocket Gamer Connects Digital 1 that's available on our YouTube channels. So I thought, shameless plug, I should throw that in.
That was lovely.
I'll try and fit in one quick question as well before we bring Kate on. And Jackie's asked, what was the most memorable moment of working on one of those final deadlines you described?
Oh gosh, there are so many. What was the most memorable one? I don't know. There's something, you know, one of my fondest ones very early in my career at Background Entertainment, when we were working on a game called Monster Lab. And this is the thing, like when you look at my career, as many titles as I've shipped over that sort of time frame, I've had a sort of career as being a firefighter, of coming in sort of towards the last minute or whatever and refining and taking things to final. But you know what, that initial project of Monster Lab was a bit of a tricky one. And we managed as a team of, you know, 4 teams of different skills to try and make these experiments come to life in a really short amount of time against all odds. And you know, everybody who I worked with on that team, I'm still in touch with now and consider like family. Like, you know, I guess it's like going to war and blood being spilled. But seeing the validation when it comes to, you know, it being received publicly, and seeing that all that hard work did pay off. And then, yeah, knowing that, you know, when you are so passionate about something and you see that little change of one little variable or something, and it's so hard to sort of itemize, but that is received well, and it was, you know, it's just completely validated, I think. Has been and I suppose it's that team camaraderie as well, isn't it? Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us here, and yeah, and thank you for getting our audience up off. Well, I'd say up off their feet, but maybe lifting their arms and waiting and participating. So thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Yes, you too as well, of course. Thank you.